Good evening, welcome everybody to another installment in the Skoolie conversion bus project. So this is going to be documenting my trials and tribulations in trying to construct a heat exchanger. And I'll talk a little bit about heat exchangers in a second. But we've gotten this camper, you may have seen that video. I had a refrigerator in it, which I was pretty excited about because it's propane and those are expensive. Had a stove top, had some water tanks, and it had a furnace. And when I fired it up, I thought, oh, this is great, propane furnace, you know, a bunch of heat coming off the front. But it seemed like there was a ton of heat that was going right up through the, through the vent stack, through the exhaust that seemed to be lost. And my frugality kicked in, like, how can I recapture some of that heat that's going right out, outside? And I thought about heat exchangers. And I'm filming this too because essentially I'm sitting in front of a heat exchanger. This is a Russian fireplace or masonry heater. And let me give you a tour of it and I'll show you how it works. So in typical wood stoves, fireplaces, the smoke goes from here and goes right up the chimney through the roof. This system's a little bit different, however. The fire comes here and then goes up through chambers here and then wraps around, goes back down both sides, and then under this heated bench, and then up through the chimney there. So the idea is that as the smoke travels through all that masonry, the masonry absorbs the heat, so by the time the smoke exits the roof, all the heat's been trapped in here in these stones, and which is awesome because the next morning we'll get up after burning one fire in the evening and the rocks on the side are still like 100 degrees and throw off the heat through the entire day. So we heat this entire house about 4 cords a year, which is, this house is about 18, it's 40 by 30 is the footprint. So it works great. So I thought, well, how can I design a similar system for this furnace to try to keep the heat inside the Skoolie rather than outside? I actually contemplated, do I get some sort of fire brick or something like that? But this thing I think is estimated at 30,000 pounds, and kind of impractical to put that weight into the bus. So then I started thinking, well, what other resources do I have? And I thought, you know what, I have the radiators, the heaters that I pulled out of the cabin of the bus. I'm like, oh, I could use those. And I also have the heat pump. And so what happens if I wrap a copper coil around a furnace pipe and build that stack and then fill it with fluid, and then I can move it through the coil with the pump and then through the radiator, and the radiator's got a fan to it that I can hook the fan up, and so maybe I could heat up that coil, heat the fluid up, blow the air through it, and that'd be great. So that was the system. So I had to buy some copper tubing and a bunch of fixtures, not fixtures, fittings, I guess, to sort of link all the pipe and the hoses together, because I kept all the coolant hoses from the bus. I thought, oh, this will work. So the first thing I did was I had to fill the copper tubing with water, because when you try to wrap it around a pipe, it tends to kink. So water's not supposed to, or it doesn't compress, so that keeps the tube from kinking as you put it around the furnace, so the furnace pipe. So I got put the tubing in the bathtub. It's 4 degrees, 5 degrees outside. I would love to get it outside and fill it with a garden hose and run a siphon to make sure I got no air in it, but it was kind of impractical this time of year. So I put it in the bathtub, did as best I can. Got it filled up with water, used some bolt cutters to crimp the ends, fill it with some hot glue, and then crimp the other end, and I had a tube full of water. And I brought that down to the basement, and I looked at the idea of wrapping it around the furnace pipe. But the furnace pipe, again, it's galvanized, it's super thin, so as soon as I started wrapping it, it would distort, which would crimp the copper tubing. So that didn't work so well. So I thought, well, I'll get some Schedule 40 PVC, 3-inch, like the furnace pipe was. Set up a little clamp essentially to hold the pipe together, and I'll wrap it that way. So that worked great. I drilled some 3-inch holes through some scrap wood, screwed it to my bench, wrapped it all up. It was awesome. Except for when I took it off the pipe, I realized when I went to put it on the furnace pipe that 3-inch PVC pipe is not the same 3 inches in the furnace pipe. course, that was a stupid mistake on my part. To some degree, I should have checked that. As a carpenter, I know that a 2x4 is really, 1.5 by 3.5. But not as a plumber, I didn't realize that the PVC pipe is actually a little bit bigger. So it had about, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch gap between the furnace pipe and the coil and the copper coil. Well, that's not going to work as well. You really need that sort of direct connection to have that heat transfer. So now it's kind of, so what do I do? Because the furnace pipe is too flexible. So I went and made basically a little T kind of cross out of plywood, and I pushed that inside the furnace pipe, hoping that that would make it rigid enough so I could wrap the pipe, the copper tubing. And it kind of worked, but the problem is that since I'd already coiled it, it made it really hard to unbend and then rebend without crimping the copper tubing, and it sort of distorted it. So I had some extra copper tubing kicking around the shop, so I was able to get, when I think it was 20 feet, so by the time I wrapped it all around, it was about 16 inches of copper tubing. I thought, well, maybe I'll use the other copper tubing that I did as well and just try to link them together, and even though it's not perfect, it'll still work. But because it distorted when I was rewrapping it, I couldn't even get the flange nuts on it. So that created a problem as well. But I thought, well, I've come this far, I might as well try it with the stretch of copper tubing that I had. So I rigged up some fittings, I built a cabinet, just took some 2x4s, ripped them down, some scrap plywood I had in the wood shop, built a little cabinet to house everything in, and put it together. Put the furnace in, put the radiator down below, put the heat pump in, and then I started filling it with water bit by bit as I connected everything together to get the fluid in. We'll obviously get the fluid in, but gravity from the top down until that was full, then make this connection, then from the top upper level pour water in, hooked it all up. So then I brought it outside because I couldn't really light the furnace without the chimney in the basement. It would set off all the alarms and kill everybody with carbon monoxide. That would be bad. So hauled it outside, fired it up, and got the, within 5 minutes, the heat plate of the furnace was 400 degrees. But in the furnace pipe itself was too hot to touch, but couldn't really get the copper tubing that hot. It was like 50 degrees, between 40 and 50 degrees. And that was when I turned the pump on. So I shut the pump off, tried to get that fluid to heat up. Then I got it up, probably close to 80 or 80, 90, and then turned the pump back on, and immediately cooled back down as it went, cycled through the system. Shut the pump off again, and I kept doing this for about 20 minutes, trying to get it to, heat up all the fluid in the system. But it just couldn't sustain the heat. And my sense is that the fluid in the radiator that was actually probably had more volume than the fluid in the coil, so as the fluid in the coil flowed in the radiator, it just cooled down. So it probably worked great as a cooling the furnace pipe system, but not so great about taking the heat from the furnace pipe and then actually heating a room. So that was the process, and those were the issues that I had. If you engineer folks may have a better idea, I would love to hear from you, and maybe get some suggestions in the comments about how it can, is it a salvageable system. I wonder if I brought the copper pipe tubing all the way up through, maybe it would be better. But at this point in the game, I've got other projects going on, and spending another $50 in copper tubing because I screwed up the first one. I don't know if my heart's quite yet in that. Unless you guys say, hey, it would definitely work, and then I'd probably go for it. So I'm not going to abandon the project. I think I'll just set it to the side. I can still use the furnace. The furnace will be great, but I'm not sure about the heat exchanger, if that will actually be functional or not. So one thing that I found, philosophical note though, I suppose there are moments of frustration in this project, especially when it didn't work and I thought it was going to work. But I think the reality of it was actually fun to sort of experiment and try things out, and at least at the end, I certainly learned something, which I think is a big part of the Skoolie mystique, I guess. You know, if you wanted to go out on your own and buy an RV, you could, but part of that sort of, you know, self-reliance and do-it-yourself and learn, and not only do you have a product at the end, hopefully, and this is still early in the process, probably going to have a lot of more frustration as we move forward, but at the same time, it's definitely putting yourself into the project and learning and growing as you go, which I'm finding just a really cool part of that process. And at the end, hopefully, not only do you have a livable vehicle and home that you can tour around the country in, but at the same time, you know, the growth and the understanding of how things work and put everything together and building new skill sets, which I think is awesome. So thanks for checking in. I'm sure I'll have more frustrations and more trials and tribulations as we move forward, but thanks a lot. I certainly appreciate the support. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't, you know, like, share, give me some comments on how I can make it better, you know, do what you do, and really look forward to seeing you either on the road or on the river. Thanks.